The Battle of Trafalgar remains one of the most iconic naval confrontations in world history, a battle that shaped the fate of empires, secured Britain's maritime supremacy, and sealed the destiny of Napoleon Bonaparte's ambitions across Europe. On October 21, 1805, off the southern coast of Spain, a mighty naval clash unfolded, bringing together the finest naval forces of the time, each driven by pride, ambition, and a fierce desire for victory. The battle was not just about ships, cannons, and sailors. It was a pivotal moment in a long-standing conflict that would shape the future of nations. The Napoleonic Wars, which had begun in 1803, were the result of Napoleon Bonaparte's relentless expansionism and his vision of a unified European empire under French control. France had already conquered much of Europe, but one threat still stood between Napoleon and complete control of the continent of Britain. The Royal Navy, the world's most formidable maritime force, posed a constant challenge to French ambitions. It was clear that if Napoleon could defeat the British Navy, he could establish unchallenged dominance over Europe. The stakes were immense, and so the stage was set for the Battle of Trafalgar, which would be fought on the high seas and remain etched in history. Napoleon had already achieved significant victories on land, but Britain's naval dominance was proving to be a constant thorn in his side. After a failed invasion attempt of Britain in 1803, Napoleon sought to weaken Britain's position by cutting off its trade routes and weakening its allies. The French emperor turned his focus to controlling the seas, particularly the English Channel, which was the gateway for British trade and reinforcements to the continent. However, Napoleon's goal of invading Britain was largely dependent on neutralizing the British Navy. By 1805, the French had assembled a large fleet, the Combined Fleet, which was stationed at various ports in Spain. Its goal was to break the British naval blockade and allow the French to launch an invasion of Britain. The fleet was composed of ships from France and Spain, and it was under the command of Vice Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve, a man chosen by Napoleon for his experience, but one whose competence was increasingly questioned as tensions grew. On the other side, Britain's fleet was led by Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, a man whose name would become synonymous with naval brilliance. Nelson had already earned a reputation as an audacious and fearless leader, and his tactics had already brought him fame across Europe. His innovative and aggressive approach to naval warfare was considered unconventional at the time, but it proved to be extremely effective in battle. As the two forces prepared for a confrontation, Nelson knew that this battle could either preserve Britain's naval supremacy or alter the balance of power in Europe. Despite being heavily outnumbered, he was determined to face the French and Spanish head-on. Nelson's famous signal to his fleet, "England expects that every man will do his duty," became a rallying cry for the sailors as they set out for the decisive confrontation. On the morning of October 21, 1805, the British fleet set sail from its base at Portsmouth, moving toward the Spanish coast. Villeneuve's fleet, which had sailed from Cadiz, was anchored off Cape Trafalgar, a rocky promontory in southern Spain, and was awaiting orders to engage the British. The British fleet, numbering 27 ships of the line, approached with determination. The French and Spanish fleet, which was composed of 33 ships of the line, waited in a defensive position, hoping to use their superior numbers to overwhelm the British forces. Despite the numerical advantage, the French fleet was riddled with coordination issues and lacked the leadership necessary for a decisive victory. Nelson, by contrast, had a well-trained, disciplined force that was eager to fight. The British forces, under Nelson's command, executed an audacious and daring plan that would be remembered for generations to come. Instead of lining up for a traditional battle in a single line, Nelson divided his forces into two columns. This unorthodox approach was designed to split the enemy's line and bring the British ships into close, intense combat where their superior gunnery and seamanship could have the greatest impact. As the two fleets closed in on each other, Nelson's ships split into two distinct groups, led by Nelson's own flagship, the HMS Victory, and Admiral Cuthbert Collingwood's flagship, the HMS Royal Sovereign. The British ships moved into position, cutting through the French and Spanish lines, creating chaos and confusion among the enemy. The battle itself was a maelstrom of smoke cannon fire, and chaos. The British ships sailed straight at the enemy, ramming their way through the lines. With the wind in their favor and the French fleet spread across a wide formation, Nelson's tactic of breaking the lines and creating a chaotic, disorganized melee on the decks of the enemy ships paid off. The British sailors, trained for exactly this type of close combat, boarded enemy vessels, bringing with them the discipline and firepower to overwhelm their foes. At the center of this action was Nelson, who, from the quarterdeck of the Victory, directed his fleet with unparalleled skill. His ships engaged in brutal cannon duels with the French and Spanish ships, but Nelson's approach was not just about firepower. His leadership was the key to the British success. He was everywhere, encouraging his men, giving orders, and ensuring that the British fleet pressed on, never hesitating or falling back. One of the most iconic moments of the battle was Nelson's fall. At 1:15 p.m., as the Victory was locked in close combat with the French flagship Bucentaure, a sniper aboard one of the French ships aimed at the British Admiral. A single bullet struck Nelson in the left shoulder, entering his body and lodging near his spine. Despite his injury, Nelson continued to direct the battle, urging his men on even as he was carried below deck. As the battle raged on, the British maintained their grip on the confrontation. By the end of the battle, 22 enemy ships had been captured, with the remaining French and Spanish forces retreating in disarray. Though the British had emerged victorious, it was a bittersweet triumph. Nelson, the man who had masterminded the strategy and led his men to victory, died shortly before the battle's conclusion. His final words, "Thank God I have done my duty," became legendary. He passed away below deck aboard the Victory, just after hearing the news of his fleet's overwhelming success. The battle was a clear and decisive victory for Britain. The French and Spanish fleets had been shattered, and Napoleon's dreams of invading Britain were dashed for good. The victory at Trafalgar ensured British naval supremacy for the next century, securing Britain's position as the world's foremost maritime power and preserving its influence across the globe. However, the cost of victory was high. While Britain lost no ships, 1,500 men were killed or wounded, including Admiral Nelson. The French and Spanish, by contrast, lost 22 ships of the line and suffered more than 7,000 casualties. Napoleon's dream of dominating Europe by sea was effectively crushed, although his ambitions on land would continue for several more years. The Battle of Trafalgar was not just a military victory, it had far-reaching consequences for the geopolitical balance of Europe. With the defeat of the combined French and Spanish fleets, Britain was able to continue its blockade of France and safeguard its interests across the seas. Napoleon would never again attempt to invade Britain, and his focus shifted back to the land campaigns that would eventually lead to his downfall in Russia. The Battle of Trafalgar left a lasting legacy. In Britain, it was seen as a defining moment of national pride, a testament to the courage and determination of the Royal Navy and its sailors. Nelson, though dead, became a national hero, his name and image immortalized in monuments, statues, and naval history. His daring tactics and leadership were studied and emulated by future generations of naval officers. In the wider world, Trafalgar marked the end of an era. It was the final major naval battle of the Age of Sail, a time when wooden ships, sails, and cannons ruled the waves. The age of steam power and ironclad ships would soon follow, but the echoes of Trafalgar would be felt for decades. Trafalgar also marked the beginning of Britain's unrivaled influence on the global stage. Without the threat of a French invasion, Britain could focus on expanding its empire, and it would continue to dominate the seas, trading routes, and diplomatic relations well into the 19th century. Napoleon, on the other hand, never fully recovered from the defeat. While he continued to reign over Europe for a time, his loss at Trafalgar had irrevocably sealed the fate of his grand empire. The battle marked the start of the end for Napoleon, as he began to face increasing resistance from both within and outside his empire. The Battle of Trafalgar is not just a story of cannons and ships, it is a tale of leadership, courage, and sacrifice. Nelson's legacy, his innovative tactics, and his unwavering devotion to duty have inspired generations of sailors, soldiers, and leaders. The battle itself, though fought on the vast expanse of the sea, echoes through time as a reminder of how a single moment can alter the course of history.